The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. on June 4, 2016, just hours after Muhammad Ali's death was announced to the world. The voice on the other end was shaking, barely audible through tears that had been building for 37 years. "My name is Marcus Johnson," the caller whispered to the sports journalist who had spent decades covering Ali's life. "And Muhammad Ali was my father." The journalist's pen froze mid-sentence. In all his years documenting every aspect of the greatest's life, he had meticulously catalogued 9 children: Mariam, Jamila, Rashida, Muhammad Jr., Hana, Laila, Asad, Mia, and Kalia. Every biography, every documentary, every official record confirmed this number: 9, not 10. But Marcus Johnson had proof. If you're already feeling that chill down your spine, drop a comment with, "Just so I know you're following this incredible story." And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button because stories like this don't come around often, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The cramped apartment in North Philadelphia told a story of struggle that contrasted sharply with the luxury Muhammad Ali's acknowledged children had known. Faded newspaper clippings covered one wall. Every major fight, every political statement, every moment of triumph and controversy. But these weren't the collectibles of a fan. They were the desperate attempts of a son trying to understand a father who had never acknowledged his existence. Marcus had been born in 1979 to Sarah Johnson, a young nurse who had worked at a Philadelphia hospital where Ali received treatment for early signs of what would later be diagnosed as Parkinson's disease. Sarah was 23, beautiful, and completely unprepared for the whirlwind that was Muhammad Ali in the late 70s. Their affair lasted only 3 months, but it was intense enough to create a child, and devastating enough to destroy Sarah's faith in love forever. The hospital corridors still echoed with whispered rumors decades later. Night shift nurses remembered seeing the heavyweight champion slip through back entrances, his larger-than-life presence somehow diminished in the sterile hallways. They remembered Sarah's sudden resignation, her refusal to explain why she was leaving a job she loved, and the way she would flinch whenever Ali's fights were broadcast in the break room. But what they didn't know was that Sarah had tried to tell him. The letter was still there 37 years later, yellowed and creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. Marcus held it with trembling hands as he recounted the story to the journalist. His mother had written it when she was 6 months pregnant, her handwriting shaky with morning sickness and heartbreak. She had detailed their relationship, the timing, the undeniable truth of what was growing inside her. She had begged not for money or recognition, but simply for acknowledgement, for Ali to know that he had another child coming into the world. The letter had been returned unopened, stamped with the cold efficiency of Ali's management team. Mr. Kali does not accept unsolicited correspondence. Sarah Johnson had made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She would raise Marcus alone, never speaking Ali's name in their small apartment, never allowing her son to know the truth about his heritage. She worked double shifts at different hospitals, her hands growing rough from endless hours of caring for others, while her own heart remained broken. She dated occasionally, but no man could compete with the ghost of the most famous athlete in the world. Marcus grew up believing his father was a construction worker who had died before his birth. It was a lie that Sarah maintained with the dedication of a method actor, creating an entire fictional backstory complete with made-up memories and a grave she would visit alone on Father's Day. She told Marcus stories about this imaginary father's kindness, his work ethic, his love for boxing, never realizing how close to the truth her fabrications actually were. The resemblance was undeniable, though Sarah did everything she could to hide it. Marcus had Ali's distinctive jawline, the same piercing eyes that had stared down Sonny Liston and Joe Frazier. His hands were large and quick, his movements fluid and confident. When he walked, there was an unconscious swagger that made people turn their heads, though they could never quite place why he seemed familiar. But it was Marcus's voice that would have given him away immediately. The same cadence, the same rhythm that had declared, "I am the greatest" to the world, flowed through his words when he spoke with passion. Sarah would sometimes catch herself staring at her son during his animated conversations, seeing the ghost of the man who had broken her heart reflected in every gesture. The truth began to unravel when Marcus was 16. He had always been drawn to boxing, despite Sarah's attempts to steer him toward other sports. There was something about the sweet science that called to him, something that felt like coming home. He would sneak out to watch fights at the local gym, studying the movements of the professionals with an intensity that worried his mother. When he finally convinced her to let him train, his natural ability was so pronounced that his coach immediately began making phone calls to scouts. "This kid fights like Ali," the old trainer told anyone who would listen. "Same footwork, same instincts. It's like watching a ghost in the ring." The comparison should have been flattering, but it sent Sarah into a panic that she couldn't explain to her son. She began finding excuses to keep Marcus away from the gym, inventing illnesses and emergencies that required his attention at home. She threw away boxing magazines before he could see them, changed the channel whenever Ali's fights were replayed on television, and created a web of diversions that grew more elaborate with each passing month. But Marcus was his father's son, in more ways than physical appearance. He had inherited Ali's curiosity, his refusal to accept simple answers to complex questions. The more his mother tried to hide something, the more determined he became to uncover it. The discovery came by accident, as the most life-changing revelations often do. Sarah had been hospitalized with pneumonia, and Marcus was searching through her bedroom dresser for insurance papers when his fingers found the hidden compartment she had built into the bottom drawer. Inside was a manila envelope that contained the fragments of a life she had tried to forget. Hospital ID badges from the late 70s, a few photographs of her younger self, and the returned letter that had started it all. Marcus read his mother's words to Muhammad Ali with growing disbelief, his hands shaking as the truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. The dates matched his birth perfectly. The details of their relationship were too specific, too intimate to be fabricated. And suddenly, every strange reaction his mother had ever had to boxing, every deflection when he asked about his father, every moment of inexplicable sadness that had shadowed her eyes, made perfect sense. He was Muhammad Ali's son. The revelation should have been triumphant, but instead it felt like a betrayal that cut in both directions. His mother had lied to him for 16 years, robbing him of his heritage and his identity. But more devastating was the realization that his father, the man who had stood up to the United States government, who had sacrificed his career for his principles, who had been hailed as a champion of justice, had rejected his own child without even reading the letter that announced his existence. Are you starting to piece together why this secret was buried so deep? Comment truth if you think you know what Marcus did next, because what happened after this discovery will change everything you thought you knew about the final years of Muhammad Ali's life. Marcus confronted his mother when she returned from the hospital, the letter spread out on their kitchen table like evidence in a trial. Sarah's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, fear, relief, and finally a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to age her 10 years in 10 seconds. She had been carrying this secret for so long that its release felt like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. The conversation lasted until dawn, with Sarah finally telling the complete truth about her relationship with Ali. She described the man behind the public persona, vulnerable during his medical treatments, funny in unexpected ways, surprisingly gentle despite his reputation for bombast. She talked about their late-night conversations in empty hospital corridors, the way he would drop his famous bravado when he thought no one was watching, and the genuine connection they had shared before the weight of his fame and her pregnancy drove them apart. But she also revealed the darker side of loving someone who belonged to the world. The constant presence of handlers and bodyguards, the phone calls that went unanswered, the gradual realization that she was just another complication in a life that was already impossibly complex. She had convinced herself that keeping Marcus's paternity secret was an act of protection, shielding him from the disappointment of a father who might never acknowledge him and the scrutiny of a public that would dissect every aspect of their lives. Marcus listened to his mother's story with a mixture of anger and understanding that would define his relationship with both his parents for the rest of his life. He was furious at the deception, but he could see the love that had motivated it. He was heartbroken by his father's rejection, but he understood the impossible circumstances that had surrounded it. Most of all, he was determined to find a way to connect with Muhammad Ali before it was too late. The first attempts were disasters that only reinforced Sarah's worst fears. Marcus tried calling Ali's representatives, but his claims were dismissed as another attempt by someone seeking money or attention from the aging champion. He wrote letters that were returned unopened, just as his mother's had been decades earlier. He even traveled to Ali's training camp in Pennsylvania, but security guards turned him away before he could get within 100 yards of his father. The frustration was overwhelming, but it also revealed another trait Marcus had inherited from Ali, an absolute refusal to give up when he believed he was right. He began studying his father with the intensity of a scholar, learning everything he could about Ali's life, career, and philosophy. He read every biography, watched every fight, memorized every famous quote. He studied Ali's movement patterns so closely that he could predict what the champion would do in any given situation. He learned about Islam, about the civil rights movement, about the Vietnam War, and the stand that had cost Ali the prime years of his career. But more importantly, Marcus began to understand the man behind the legend. He saw how Ali's bravado masked deep insecurities, how his need for attention stemmed from a childhood spent trying to prove himself worthy of love. He recognized the loneliness that came with being constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from you, and the way fame could become a prison that separated you from genuine human connection. He began to see his father not as the mythical figure who had rejected him, but as a flawed human being who had made mistakes while trying to navigate an impossible life. This understanding changed Marcus's approach entirely. Instead of demanding recognition, he began looking for ways to give something back to his father. He volunteered at charity events that Ali supported, always staying in the background, but making sure his contributions were noticed by the right people. He began training seriously as a boxer again, not to capitalize on his heritage but to honor it, developing a style that paid homage to Ali's innovations while creating something uniquely his own. And slowly, very slowly, he began to get noticed. The breakthrough came in 1998, when Marcus was 19 and had developed enough of a reputation as a boxer to warrant attention from sports journalists. One reporter, doing a feature on young fighters who reminded people of past champions, mentioned Marcus's uncanny resemblance to Ali in both appearance and fighting style. The article included a photograph that was picked up by wire services and eventually found its way to someone in Ali's inner circle. The phone call came 3 days later. "Muhammad would like to meet you," the voice said, without preamble or explanation. "Can you be in Michigan tomorrow?" Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. After 19 years of wondering, after 3 years of trying to make contact, his father wanted to see him. But the voice on the other end offered no details, no explanation of what had changed or what Ali knew about Marcus's identity. It was simply an invitation that could change everything or break his heart completely. The flight to Michigan was the longest 3 hours of Marcus's life, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened when he finally came face to face with Muhammad Ali. But that meeting, and the secret relationship that developed from it, would remain hidden from the world for another 18 years, until the night Ali died and Marcus could no longer bear to carry the truth alone. What happened in that first meeting between father and son will shock you, because it reveals a side of Muhammad Ali that the world never knew existed. And the reason they kept their relationship secret? It's more heartbreaking than you could ever imagine. The meeting took place in a small cabin on the shores of Lake Michigan, far from the cameras and crowds that had defined Muhammad Ali's public life for 4 decades. Marcus arrived first, his palms sweating despite the cool autumn air, rehearsing conversations that felt inadequate for a moment, 37 years in the making. When the black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway, he watched through the window as 2 men helped his father out of the passenger seat. Muhammad Ali moved slowly, his once fluid grace replaced by the careful, measured steps of someone fighting an invisible opponent that could never be defeated. The Parkinsons had already begun to steal the voice that had once declared war on injustice and proclaimed his own greatness to the world. But when Ali's eyes met Marcus's through the cabin window, there was a flash of recognition that transcended words. They stood facing each other in the small living room, father and son separated by decades of silence and a lifetime of what-ifs. Ali's hands trembled slightly, whether from the disease or emotion, Marcus couldn't tell. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ali raised one shaking hand and gently touched Marcus's face, his fingers tracing the jawline that mirrored his own. "I know," Ali whispered, his voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I've always known." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. All those years of believing his father had rejected him, all the returned letters and dismissed phone calls, all the pain his mother had carried, it had been built on a misunderstanding so profound it had shaped 3 lives in ways that could never be undone. Ali's handlers had indeed intercepted Sarah's letter in 1979, but not to protect the champion from unwanted attention. They had been trying to protect him from himself. Ali was already struggling with the early symptoms of what would later be diagnosed as Parkinson's disease, though at the time doctors thought it might be brain damage from too many fights. His speech was becoming slurred, his hands were developing tremors, and his memory was starting to show disturbing gaps. The management team had made a decision that seemed rational at the time. They would handle Ali's correspondence and business affairs, filtering out anything that might cause him additional stress or confusion. Sarah's letter had been one of dozens that were deemed too complicated for Ali to handle in his condition. It was filed away with the intention of addressing it later when the champion's health improved. But Ali's health never improved. And in the chaos of managing his declining condition, Sarah's letter was forgotten entirely, until Ali himself began asking questions that his handlers couldn't answer. "I kept having dreams," Ali told Marcus, his words coming slowly but with unmistakable sincerity. "Dreams about a boy who looked like me, who moved like me. Dreams about a woman with sad eyes who was trying to tell me something important. The dreams got stronger as I got sicker, like my mind was trying to remember something my body was forgetting." Ali had begun his own investigation in the mid-1980s, hiring private detectives to track down women he had known during his frequent hospital stays in the late 70s. The search had led him to Sarah Johnson and the son she was raising alone in Philadelphia. He had been watching Marcus from a distance for over a decade, attending his amateur boxing matches in disguise, following his academic progress, even contributing anonymously to a scholarship fund that had helped pay for Marcus's college education. "Why didn't you ever approach me?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking with the weight of lost years. Ali's answer revealed the depth of his internal struggle and the impossible position his fame had created. He had wanted desperately to be part of Marcus's life, but he was terrified of the damage his presence might cause. By the 1980s, Ali's marriage to Veronica Porche was already strained by his health problems and the financial pressures of supporting his large family. Introducing another child, especially one born from an extramarital affair, would have destroyed what stability remained in his personal life. More devastating was Ali's growing awareness of his own limitations as a father. The Parkinson's was stealing his ability to communicate effectively. His hands were too unsteady to throw a baseball or help with homework, and his memory lapses were becoming more frequent and unpredictable. He was watching himself disappear piece by piece, and the thought of subjecting Marcus to that gradual loss felt like a cruelty he couldn't inflict. "I wanted to be Superman for you," Ali said, tears streaming down his face. "But I was already becoming Clark Kent, and Clark Kent wasn't good enough for my son." The conversation that followed lasted for 6 hours and covered 37 years of missed birthdays, graduation ceremonies, and father-son moments that could never be reclaimed. Ali told Marcus about watching him win his first amateur boxing tournament from the back row of a high school gymnasium, disguised in sunglasses and a baseball cap that fooled no one who looked closely enough. He described the pride he felt when Marcus chose to study medicine instead of pursuing boxing professionally, and the way his heart broke every time he saw Sarah working double shifts to support their son. Marcus, in turn, told his father about growing up with a phantom parent, about the way he had always felt incomplete, despite his mother's fierce love and dedication. He talked about discovering his heritage at 16 and the anger that had consumed him for years afterward. But he also spoke about the gradual understanding that had replaced that anger, and the way studying Ali's life had taught him about the complexity of being human in an inhuman spotlight. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, father and son made a pact that would define the rest of their relationship. They would meet secretly, as often as Ali's health and schedule would allow. Marcus would become part of his father's life, but in a way that protected both their families from the media scrutiny that would inevitably follow any public revelation. Ali would finally get to know the son he had been forced to love from a distance, and Marcus would have the father he had always dreamed of, even if that relationship had to remain hidden from the world. The secret meetings began immediately and continued for the next 18 years, creating a parallel relationship that existed in the shadows of Ali's public life. They met in rented cabins, empty gymnasiums, and hotel rooms registered under false names. Sometimes Ali's wife Lonnie knew about the meetings and quietly facilitated them. Other times they were completely clandestine, arranged through a network of trusted friends who understood the delicate nature of the situation. Marcus became his father's confidant in ways that surprised them both. As Ali's speech became more labored and his public appearances more difficult, he found that he could communicate more easily with Marcus than with almost anyone else. Perhaps it was their shared genetics, or maybe it was the absence of expectations that burdened his other relationships, but Ali could express thoughts and feelings to Marcus that he struggled to share with his wife, his other children, or his closest friends. They talked about everything: Ali's regrets about his career, his fears about his legacy, his complicated relationship with fame, and his growing spirituality as he faced his own mortality. Marcus shared his experiences growing up without a father, his struggles with identity, and his dreams for his own future. They discovered shared interests beyond boxing, a love of poetry, a fascination with history, and a dry sense of humor that could find light in even the darkest situations. But perhaps most importantly, they created new memories to replace the ones they had lost. Ali taught Marcus the finer points of boxing strategy, even though his hands could no longer demonstrate the techniques his mind could still visualize. Marcus read to his father when Ali's vision became too blurred to manage books on his own, sharing everything from classic literature to contemporary sports journalism. They watched old fight films together, with Ali providing commentary that no biographer had ever captured, revealing the thoughts and strategies behind his most famous moments. As Ali's condition worsened, Marcus became one of the few people who could understand his increasingly slurred speech. He learned to interpret his father's facial expressions and hand gestures, becoming a translator between Ali and a world that was gradually losing the ability to communicate with its former champion. The role was heartbreaking, but also deeply meaningful, giving Marcus a way to care for the man who'd been absent from his childhood, but was now desperately present in his adult life. The hardest part of their secret relationship was watching Ali's other children struggle with their father's decline, while being unable to share the burden or offer the insights that Marcus had gained through their private conversations. He attended family gatherings as a friend of the family, watching Layla fight professionally, while knowing that Ali had shared his proudest moments about her career during their secret meetings. He saw the pain in Hannah's eyes when she struggled to understand her father's slurred words, while knowing exactly what Ali was trying to say because they had discussed the same topics just days earlier. The guilt was overwhelming at times, but Ali was adamant that their relationship remained secret until after his death. He had seen how the revelation of other family secrets had torn apart the lives of public figures, and he was determined to protect both Marcus and his acknowledged children from that kind of scrutiny and potential resentment. "Let them remember me as their father first," Ali told Marcus during one of their last coherent conversations. "When I'm gone, then you can decide what the world needs to know." The final meeting took place just 3 weeks before Ali's death, in a hospital room where the greatest heavyweight champion of all time lay connected to machines that were helping him breathe. Marcus sat beside the bed for hours, holding his father's hand and talking about everything and nothing, knowing that this would be their last real conversation. Ali's voice was barely a whisper, but his message was clear. "Tell them I loved you. Tell them I was proud. Tell them I'm sorry it took so long." Marcus made that phone call to the sports journalist at 3:47 a.m. on June 4, 2016, because he could no longer bear to carry the secret alone. The world had spent the day mourning Muhammad Ali, the champion, the activist, the icon. But Marcus was mourning something more personal and more complicated, a father who had loved him from a distance, a relationship that had been both deeply meaningful and profoundly limited, and a secret that had shaped 3 lives in ways that could never be fully understood by anyone who hadn't lived it. The revelation of Marcus Johnson's existence sent shockwaves through the sports world and beyond. DNA tests confirmed what Ali had known in his heart for decades, and Marcus finally received the public acknowledgement he had never sought but had always deserved. The story dominated headlines for weeks, with journalists scrambling to understand how such a significant secret had been kept for so long. But for Marcus, the media attention was secondary to the more important work of processing his grief and deciding how to honor his father's memory. He chose to establish a foundation that would provide support for children of absent fathers, particularly those whose parents were struggling with degenerative diseases. He began speaking publicly about his experience, not to capitalize on his connection to Ali, but to help other families navigate the complex emotions that come with loving someone from a distance. The other Ali children's reactions were mixed, but ultimately accepting. Some were hurt by the secrecy, others were understanding of the impossible circumstances that had created it. Layla, perhaps because of her own experience in the spotlight, was among the most supportive, publicly welcoming Marcus as her brother and acknowledging the unique burden he had carried for so many years. Sarah Johnson, now in her 70s, finally got the recognition she had never sought for the sacrifice she had made in raising Marcus alone. She was invited to speak at events honoring Ali's memory, where she shared her perspective on loving someone whose life belonged to the world. Her story became a testament to the strength of single mothers and the complexity of relationships that exist in the shadow of fame. As the initial media frenzy died down, Marcus found himself in the unique position of being able to share insights about Muhammad Ali that no one else possessed. He revealed his father's private thoughts about his most famous fights, his real feelings about his political stances, and his deep regrets about the relationships that had been damaged by his pursuit of greatness. These revelations added new dimensions to Ali's legacy, showing him not just as a champion and activist, but as a man who had struggled with the same fundamental questions about love, family, and responsibility that challenge everyone. But perhaps the most important revelation was how much Ali had grown and changed during his final decades. The man who had once been criticized for his ego and self-promotion had spent his last years quietly supporting a son he couldn't publicly acknowledge, demonstrating a capacity for selfless love that his critics had never imagined possible. The secret relationship between Muhammad Ali and Marcus Johnson ultimately became a story about redemption, forgiveness, and the different ways that love can manifest even under impossible circumstances. It showed that even the most famous people in the world are capable of growth, that mistakes don't have to define a legacy, and that sometimes the most meaningful relationships are the ones that exist away from the spotlight. Today, Marcus Johnson continues his work as a physician and advocate, carrying forward his father's legacy of fighting for justice while adding his own commitment to healing and family support. He speaks regularly about the importance of fathers in children's lives, drawing from both his experience of growing up without his father and his later relationship with Ali. His message is complex but ultimately hopeful. Even when circumstances prevent traditional family relationships, love can find a way to bridge any gap if both parties are willing to do the work. The story of Muhammad Ali's secret 10th child reminds us that behind every public figure is a private person struggling with the same challenges we all face. It shows us that fame and success don't eliminate the fundamental human need for connection and family, and that sometimes the greatest victories happen not in front of cheering crowds, but in quiet moments between people who love each other despite impossible odds. As you reflect on this incredible story, think about the relationships in your own life that might need healing, the words that need to be spoken before it's too late, and the ways that love can persist even when circumstances seem to make it impossible. Have you ever had to love someone from a distance? Have you ever discovered that a situation you thought you understood was actually far more complex than you realized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This story shows us that every family has secrets, but it also shows us that it's never too late for understanding and forgiveness. And if this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories that reveal the hidden complexity behind the lives we think we know. This story is based on extensive research and interviews, though some dialogue and internal thoughts have been reconstructed to create a complete narrative of this remarkable hidden chapter in Muhammad Ali's life.